The Legions of Athena. Chapter 21. For a second time that day, Maximus awoke not knowing where he was. His head was throbbing, and it took a moment for his eyes to adjust. He did not know the room he was in, but judging from the metallic walls, he figured he was back in the owl's nest. There was not much in the room other than the bed he was on and a table near it. There was a tiny window to his left, too high above him to look outside, and a single door facing him. He sat up in hopes of getting to his door, only to find that he could not leave his bed. His hands had been handcuffed to the railings of the bed. A tingle of fear ran down his neck as he searched for his sword, but it was nowhere to be found. They had confiscated the knife he kept strapped in his boots as well. Max tried to free himself from his shackles to no avail, but the commotion he made gathered a response as the door slid open. An Athenian guard stood at the door, but he did not step inside. Instead, the guard let the door close just as quickly as it had opened. "Hey!" Maximus shouted after him, but the door remained shut. Maximus tried to recall all that had happened before he ended up here. He remembered the tournament, but his memories were strange. The fight in the arena was split into two parts in his head. He remembered everything as he should, till the moment when Theo had plunged his electric batons into his neck. He ran his hands across his neck, expecting to find the marks they had left, but there was nothing there. In fact, for someone who had just fought a fierce battle, he felt fine. He could not feel any aches or pains. But for the first time in months, he felt worn out. Then he remembered the second half of the battle. Maximus remembered everything he had done, but the memories did not feel like his own. He felt as though he was watching the fight from afar, or somewhere deep in his own head, as his body moved on autopilot, destroying the tyros around him. He knew he was doing it, but somehow he felt like a spectator in his own body. He did not have time to ponder deeply on this as the door slid open again, and Achilles and Odysseus stepped into the room. Whatever relief he felt at seeing them quickly disappeared. On seeing the expression Achilles had, he had never seen his mentor so furious, and worse still, the anger seemed to be directed at him. He marched straight up to Maximus, threw something on his lap, and said, "Explain." Maximus looked down to see the object he had just been tossed was a pocket watch, but the watch itself had a shattered glass and red stains on it. It took a moment for him to recognize the watch, but he knew it. It was the same pocket watch Achilles had bought a while back in Vulcan, the one he had given to Daedalus. Maximus looked back at his teacher dumbstruck, not knowing what he expected him to say. But luckily Odysseus stepped in and put a hand on his old comrade's shoulder, signaling him to step back. "Maximus, we found Daedalus's body in one of his labs," Odysseus said coldly, not betraying any sort of emotion. "The cause of death being a stab to the upper torso from a blade. From the stab wound, it can be deduced that the size of the blade is roughly that of your own." It took a moment for Max to register what Odysseus had meant by that. When it did, he felt as if all his insides had turned. You think I killed him?" Maximus said, shocked. He couldn't believe this. He wanted to puke in disgust. How could they even think that? He looked at Achilles, now pacing in anger, which made him feel worse. "No one is saying that, but look at the situation we are in," Odysseus said, in a rather strained calmness. "An ex-soldier from the country we are at war with simply proclaims to the entire nation that Daedalus, Athena's most trusted advisor, is dead. Furthermore, he does so after defeating most of the tyros and displaying powers unknown to even his teacher. Half the country was shouting for your execution. I would suggest you to be cautious with your response." Maximus was at a loss of words. His situation did seem suspicious. "I didn't kill him," was all he could murmur. "Then who did?" Odysseus pressed on. "A swordsman. From the way he talked, he seemed to have known Daedalus personally. He was strong, but not a god, or at least not any god I have ever heard of. He said his name was Perseus, I think," Maximus finished. Odysseus looked at him with shrewd eyes, unsure on whether to believe him. But it was the way Achilles responded that caught him off guard. His anger was still there, but it had toned down. His eyes had widened in surprise. "Boy, this Perseus, what did he look like?" he asked. "Well, he was tall." Max recollected trying to call to mind everything he could. "With brownish hair. He used a sword, but on his left arm he also had this golden gauntlet, and he had bright green eyes," Achilles completed. Maximus nodded, unsure of how his mentor knew this. Achilles, on the other hand, looked as though he had just been punched in the gut. Odysseus looked at his old friend for explanation, but just then the door slid open again and Elijah stepped in. "General, the goddess has ordered that she wishes to speak with the prisoner, personally," she said, all the while being careful to not even glance in Max's direction. "The goddess also wishes for both of you to be present as well." Odysseus let out a low sigh and said, "As she commands. Elisha, bring Maximus up to the throne room while we go ahead to update her on what we have learned." With these words, the two heroes left the room without so much as a word. Max wished Achilles had said more, that he believed his words or anything. But there was no luck. He was stuck alone in the room with Elisha, who still refused to look at him. Once they were on their way to the throne room and farther away from where Max was being held, Odysseus asked, "Do you believe him?" Achilles nodded. "That bit about Perseus, how did you know? Have you met him on your travels?" he asked next. Achilles took a moment to respond. "Not in my travels, no." "Then Yesterday at the pub. I think I may have run into him, replied Achilles. What? Odysseus exclaimed, shocked. I cannot be certain. I met a man yesterday who fits this description, but it's what he talked about that makes me suspicious, recalled Achilles. Which is what exactly? Odysseus probed. Who would win in a fight between Perseus and Achilles? Perhaps he knew who I was. Perhaps he was toying with me, said Achilles. Perhaps it was mere coincidence, hoped Odysseus. You and I have been alive for too long to still believe in coincidences, remarked his friend. Odysseus shook his head in disbelief. The situation grows more harrowing by the second, but what of the power the boy displayed? Did you truly not know what he was capable of? Achilles did not answer, but Odysseus did not let it rest. He pulled at his best friend's shoulder and repeated, Tell me. I knew there was more to Maximus, but I wasn't sure what, he said. Odysseus looked grim. My suspicions were more about his blade rather than the boy, Achilles began. It was easy to see the blade was not ordinary. It had even given him visions of the gods themselves. Suffice to say, I was curious. Which is why you agreed to train the boy. Odysseus deduced, and Achilles nodded. While training him, I learned that the blade was no ordinary energy weapon. I tried to wield it myself to no real results, Achilles said. So only he can activate it, Odysseus said. So what we saw in the arena, you think it is the blade's doing? You think the weapon is possessed? Achilles shook his head. I thought so at first, but during Max's training, I realized that he himself was skilled, too skilled for a 17-year-old. But what was even more peculiar was the speed at which he advanced. His body was well attuned for battle, unnaturally well, he said. So a boy with unnatural gifts comes across a blade only he can wield. What do you call that, a coincidence? Odysseus asked. They had just reached the entrance to Athena's throne room, but before entering it, Achilles turned to his friend and said, As I said, I don't believe in coincidences. Maximus was outside the throne room now. He was told to wait, and he had no doubt he was the topic of discussion inside. So he stood there silently, with only Elisha for company. The tyro had not looked him in the eye even once, and even now she found the wall more interesting than him. Then, out of nowhere, she blurted, Who did it? Maximus jerked his head to look at her, but her eyes were still fixed to the wall. What? You don't think it was me? I know it wasn't you, she answered. Why? Maximus asked suspiciously. Out on the arena, you could have ended us all, but you didn't, though you despised us. There's no way you could have killed Daedalus. I doubt you could kill anyone, she surmised. Max was furious at this. I used to be a soldier of Mars. I've been in battles before, he insisted. Elisha spoke. That maybe, but you never took a life, did you? Probably stationed in one of the outposts being a greenhorn, never any major action there. Maximus didn't know what she was getting at, but she was right. He had been in battles and been in his fair share of fights, even seen people die in front of him. But he had never actually taken a life. He was posted away from the front lines. Most of his duties involved scouting and chasing bandits. I'm right, aren't I? Elisha said. But you will soon. Whatever you are, or whatever it is that you turned into in the Colosseum, something like that was born to kill. Elisha didn't say anything after that, and Maximus didn't know how to respond. It was easy to see that she was afraid of him. Considering how she had treated him before, he should have been happy, but instead it made him feel sick. The doors to the throne room finally opened. Maximus entered alone. The room itself was immense and circular. Everything from the walls to the floor was made of glistening steel. The room itself was decorated with marble sculptures, and above a glass roof revealed gray clouds seeping into the clear blue sky. Maximus walked towards the end of the hall. There were a host of people awaiting him. Achilles and Odysseus stood facing the throne, along with the announcer Dalton and a lady he did not know. The lady was holding a long cylinder in her hand as well. The goddess herself was seated on her throne with her champion by her side. Theseus frowned upon seeing him, which was enough to send a chill down Max's spine. Athena, on the other hand, gave him an inquisitive look, her sharp eyes studying him meticulously. As he approached them, it was Dalton who spoke first. Why is he not in chains? A murderer like him must not be allowed near the goddess unbound, he said. His crime has not been proven, Dalton, and he is innocent until proven guilty, Athena said firmly. And this child is no threat to me, are you, boy? The way Athena said those words, it wasn't really a question, but more of a statement. But Maximus knew he should answer, No, my goddess, and it wasn't me who killed Daedalus. It was a man named Perseus. Yes, Achilles has already informed us of your cleverly spun lies. Dalton began, but Athena silenced him. You must understand why this story is hard to believe, Athena explained. I know Perseus, and he bears no ill will to me, or to Daedalus for that matter. We were even allies at a point in time, but the same cannot be said for you, Martian. You were one of Ares' men not too long ago. I cannot vouch for you. But I can, said Achilles. If Maximus wanted Daedalus dead, he had 100 chances before. He did not do this. For the first time since entering the room, Maximus felt relieved. If nothing else, Achilles believed him, but he knew that was not enough. This Perseus, he was working for someone else. He kept talking about his boss. Also, he seemed genuinely sorry about what he had to do. A silence followed these words. Somehow Maximus thought the goddess believed him. Even worse, he felt that the goddess knew who Perseus's master was. Athena turned to the woman and said, "Pallas, has the blade been examined?" "Thoroughly, my queen." "It seems the boy speaks the truth," Lady Pallas confirmed. "There are no traces of our deceased advisor's blood anywhere on it." She went ahead to open the long cylindrical container to reveal Max's sword. "Then return it to the boy." "I trust him as well," Athena said. "Return to your chambers, Maximus. You are not to leave your tower under any circumstance. We will summon you if further questioning is required." Maximus finally felt like he could breathe again. He gave a bow and decided to quickly leave the throne room before further complications arose. He glanced over at Achilles, but he wouldn't meet his eyes. He walked fast towards the automatic doors, but as the doors slid open, he found his path blocked by a tall, slender figure. "Madam Hex," Max said, startled at seeing her. The tall woman looked down at him with the unsettling white mask of hers. She had her polecat with her as well, who hissed on seeing Maximus. Madam Hex stepped into the room before turning to Maximus and saying, "Come," and began walking towards the throne. Maximus was unsure about what was going on, but he followed her to the throne. Once there, she said, "Athena, I wish to speak to you and the boy alone." "How rude," Dalton started. "Madam Hex, we are having a most important—" "Get out, all of you," Athena said, cutting Dalton off abruptly. Not even Odysseus or Achilles questioned her words. They all left immediately, leaving Maximus alone in the room with the goddess of war and the mysterious Madam Hex. Once the doors were shut behind them, Athena spoke. "Why have you come?" "The inventor's death is a focal point," Madam Hex said in her echoing voice. "Change is inevitable." Maximus felt as though the madam had just read something from a fortune cookie, but Athena seemed to have understood. That much is obvious. He has been hunting Daedalus for decades. With his death, his search is at a dead end. "I have no doubt his rage shall be aimed at me now for protecting him for so long," Athena said. "But make no mistake, I will not go to my grave quietly." "Perhaps there is hope," Madam Hex said, turning to Max, "for he has arrived, or rather survived." Now Maximus and Athena seemed to be on the same page because both of them were looking at the madam in confusion. "You speak as though the boy is a hero of prophecy, born in time of need," Athena said. "Perhaps not born, but rather made," divulged Madam Hex. More gibberish, Maximus thought, but Athena's eyes widened. She looked at Maximus like his existence was an impossibility. "Boy, how old are you?" she asked. "Almost 18, Maximus said, uncertain what that had to do with anything. Madam Hex came closer to him with her polecat still in her arms. She let the creature sniff Max before pulling it back again. Then she said, "Well over 3 centuries. I felt his aura to be strange when I met him, but I only realized what he was after his performance in the arena," she continued, stroking her pet. "And Gale agrees with me." Maximus no longer even pretended to understand the conversation. The crazy purple-robed lady had just said he was over 300 years old, and then said that her polecat agreed with her. Luckily, Athena voiced aloud what he was thinking. "But that's impossible." "Improbable, perhaps, but certainly not impossible," Madam Hex corrected. "There are no impossibilities when we immortals are involved." Great, more folksy wisdom, Maximus thought to himself. He had also begun wondering if Athena was just entertaining the ideas of the deranged magician. Perhaps Madam Hex was a mad person whom the goddess had taken a fancy to. Perhaps she was her crazy aunt or something. Wait, did gods have aunts for that matter? But Athena seemed shaken at the woman's words. "No, I had seen the creations near completion. They were all fully grown, battle-ready. Not some adolescent simpleton." That brought back Maximus's attention. He did not appreciate being called a simpleton, but he wasn't about to protest that to a goddess. "Yes, all but one," Madam Hex said eerily. Athena sat up in disbelief to stare at Maximus and murmured, "The child." Maximus was really starting to freak out from the conversation. They seemed to be talking about him as if he was someone or something else, and goddess or not, he wanted an explanation. But just as he was mustering up the courage to ask, crash! A large crash had come from above them as something burst through the glass ceiling and fell to the floor of the throne room. The bloody mess of bronze and steel got up and revealed itself to be Icarus. It was clear that Icarus had fought with more than just the ceiling by just looking at him. His bronze armor was battered, and one of his mechanical wings was broken. Blood and oil oozed out of him. But the commander of the 8th Legion still limped forward to Athena and said, "Commander Leos is dead. The vanguard has been defeated. Ares is at our doorstep." The Legions of Athena. Chapter 22. The vast green pastures to the north of Athens had begun to bleed red as the war god's forces marched onto it. From above, it seemed as though a crimson carpet was being laid across the grasslands, trampling everything in its path. The Red Army had marched onto the fields and set up camp at its edges. Nothing lay between them and their destination now except even plains, providing a perfect view of what they had come to conquer Athens. The Athon air fortress was the last of the Martian forces to enter the field from the jagged hills behind them. At its helm, watching his vast army with satisfaction, sat Ares. A smirk ran across the war god's face today, which was a rare sight indeed. But this was no ordinary day. This was a day Ares had been waiting for over a century, ever since his first little skirmish with Athena so long ago. He remembered it well. All for that cunning minx Aphrodite. Aphrodite was never the strongest of gods, and many non-Olympian gods could match her in direct battle. Yet she sat among them in the Council of 12, along with Artemis and Apollo and Ares himself. This was by no way an accident, or as the common mules believed, because of her looks. She was by far the most devious among them, and her schemes are what turned her from a lowly river goddess into the goddess of love. Her marriage to that ugly old fool Hephaestus was no mistake either, but a calculated move to get her closer to being an Olympian god. Once the blacksmith had outlived his usefulness, she threw him aside, but not before taking half of his kingdom for herself in the divorce. Ares remembered those days fondly. That was the time Aphrodite had come to him proclaiming love, but Ares was no fool. He knew she merely wanted his strength to back her as she claimed half the Vulcan kingdom for herself and renamed it as Venus. But the war god didn't care. He gladly fulfilled Aphrodite's requests. She was like an addiction for him, even before she decided to divorce the smith god, an addiction he had enjoyed for many nights before. So he gave her the kingdom she had always dreamed of, but this did not quench her greed for even a century. Soon set her eyes on the rest of Hephaestus' kingdom. This was when Ares had first locked horns with Athena, who had come to the smith god's aid in the name of justice. But she did not worry her then. Minerva was not even at half its current glory back then, but Ares still felt it a wise move to back down and let the crippled king keep his desert country. Athena was nothing then. Her kingdom had barely scraped her into the Olympian Council, but she had allies and was part of a dangerous faction called the Sisters of Libra. The Libra sisterhood consisted of some of the most powerful women of the time, founded to uphold the ideals of truth and equality for all. None among them was more dangerous than their leader, Themis, the goddess of divine justice. Even Ares knew better than to challenge her on account of one of Aphrodite's tantrums. The memories of these events a millennium ago were fresh in the war god's mind as he gazed upon the city of Athens. Themis was long dead, and her precious sisters of Libra had gone extinct. No one was coming to save Athena or her kingdom. The mountain ranges that ran along the borders of Mars and Minerva were a predicament for Ares. Crossing it was no easy task, and an attack directly after such an ascent had proven futile in the past. But this time it was different. After the last battle, Ares' main forces had never retreated to Mars. Instead, they hid in the valleys in Minerva, concealed by the hollow storm, all the while resting and preparing themselves in the safety of the so-called truce. Ares knew that the peasants and the sheep would bleat that he had broken his word and dishonored the truce. But in all the years he had been alive, he had learned one thing, that history was written by the victors. Once he crushed Athena, he would be the one to dictate what is right. And crush her, he would, he thought, proudly beaming at his forces, 80,000 strong, readying themselves for the siege of Athens. Maximus had reached to the West Tower. After Icarus had crashed their meeting to deliver his message, the goddess had ordered him back to the tower. He didn't want to leave. He wanted to help Icarus to the infirmary, and perhaps even break the news of his father's demise. It was not a conversation he wished to have, but he felt as though he owed it to Daedalus. But Athena's orders were clear, and moreover, Max realized that the news of his father's death perhaps should not come from the person who half the country believed had killed him. Besides, it might not be the time to tell Icarus at all. The country would soon be at war. Maximus found his friends in the dining area of the tower. All three of them were relieved to see him. Mia had jumped off her seat to hug him. It was clear from her reddened eyes that she had been crying. Hedger was sulking in a corner but gave him a half-hearted smile when he saw him. There were a few broken chairs on the floor, and he had no doubt they were Rex's work. Breaking things was how he vented his feelings when he was upset. There were 3 bowls of purple goop on the table that remained untouched. The Minotaur came up to him and put his bionic arm on his shoulder and asked, "What the hell's going on, Max?" He sat down and told them about what had happened to Daedalus. When he finished it, Rex asked, "Perseus, who the snarg is that?" "No idea," Max said. "He seemed infamous. Achilles seemed to know him." "Do you think we would be allowed to go to the funeral?" Mia asked. "If there is a funeral," Max said, which earned him confused looks. "Ares is making his move. He's marching towards Athens as we speak." This got everyone's attention. "What do you mean Ares is making his move? What about the treaty?" Hedger argued. "Can't say I'm surprised," Rex said. "Ares cares squat about honor. So what do we do?" Mia asked. "If that's true, this place will be a battlefield soon. On my way back, I overheard that they are evacuating the citizens through the southern entrance, probably to the other major cities in Minerva," Max said. "Then we should leave too," Hedger said. "I mean, I know that the Aegis Wall is impenetrable and all, but I'll still feel a lot safer far away from a war zone." "You guys should leave if you want, but I'm staying," Maximus asserted firmly. "What?" Rex asked. "What good are you here? We used to be soldiers of Mars. Maybe we could provide them with some intel, or maybe we could fight. I want to help in any way I can." Rex narrowed his one good eye on hearing these words. It was clear he was not happy about this. "You want to go against Mars, Max? What you're talking about is treason." Maximus couldn't believe what Rex had just said. After all that had happened, he still considered Mars as his homeland. This was the final insult to the freak show that was his life. Max exploded, and before he knew it, he was off his seat shouting, "Treason! Treason! We were chased out of our homes by them, forced to leave everything we knew behind. They chase us across 2 countries, try to kill us, send a freaking tank after us, and you still want to stay loyal to that ruthless warmonger Ares." Rex was taken aback. Max had never shouted at him before. But then again, Max had done a lot of things Rex didn't think was possible. But the Minotaur was not about to back down. Is Ares the only thing you can see a runt? Those soldiers that are fighting for him are just following orders, just like the 2 of us used to. And look where that got us. Athens gave us shelter from our so-called brothers in arms, or did you forget that? Oh, so now you want to be the savior of Athens. Once you blacked out in the Colosseum, these people were asking for your head on a silver platter. They were so sure that ya were guilty they didn't even want a verdict from the goddess. And now ya want to protect these people? Rex bellowed. "I don't care about Athens. What I care about is destroying Ares," Max roared. Rex couldn't believe what he wasn't hearing. This wasn't like Max at all. This was not the kid who had quit the army because he didn't want his life to be about battle. This was the runt he had to protect in scuffles in the trenches, and now he wanted to destroy gods. Anger boiled up inside Rex. Destroy Ares? And will you destroy Mars with him? Rex mocked. And the trenches as well. Cindy, Talk, Roderick, and even your precious Kayla. Wipe them out all, would you? That's not what I said, Max said through gritted teeth. But if I could help get back at Ares. Ares is Mars, Rex shouted. When are you going to get that in your thick skull? In facim tuam, Mia chanted out of nowhere, and the purple goop flew out from bowls and landed on both their faces. It even hit Hedger right in the snout. You 2 need to cool down, Mia said. Maximus, think about what you're saying. This is a battle of the gods. There is no way you can help Athena, even if you want to. If a war is imminent, we have to get out of here. Listen to her, Max, Rex said, wiping the food from his face. We don't owe these people anything. He then stormed off before Max could say another word. Max felt dryness in his throat as he sat back down, wiping away his own goop. He had had arguments with Rex before, but never like this. He had to admit, Mia was right. What help would he be in this war? The 3 of them sat quietly in the room, not looking at each other. Finally, it was Mia who broke the silence. Sorry about that, Hedger. I was only aiming for the other 2. I still haven't perfected that spell, I guess, she apologized. That's fine, Hedger replied with a weak smile, his face still half purple. Hearing those 2 squabble like an old married couple was starting to make me hungry anyway. He then went ahead to try and lick whatever goop was left on his face. So, should we pack our things or what? Hedger asked Max. Maximus was equally confused about what they ought to do next, but then he remembered that he still had something important to take care of. He felt his pockets, and it was still there, the necklace Daedalus had trusted him with. Max jumped back to his feet, immediately startling the others. I have to go see Achilles. I'll consult him on what our next move should be, he said, and then quickly left for the elevator. But we're not allowed to leave the tower, Mia shouted after him. But it was too late. Max was gone. The Legions of Athena. Chapter 23. Athena sat alone in her bedchambers. Though it was well past midnight, she was still wide awake. She sat with her fingers intertwined, contemplating the events that were unfolding around her. Things were going so smoothly, too, she thought to herself in silence. But her advisor's death was unforeseen. At the hands of Perseus, no less, an anomaly which had appeared from nowhere. She knew why he had done it. Removing Daedalus was an option she had considered herself, one she had felt ashamed for even thinking, but it was the most logical option. With his death, the trail would end. She had carefully kept herself in the dark regarding the matters Daedalus had dealt with, so as to avoid any involvement with the one chasing him. But if the storm that covered Ares and his men were any indication, it had not been enough. Athena knew of the hollow storm much before Achilles had warned her about it. In fact, Athena knew a lot more than she let on. For you see, the war that was about to unfold was not an unexpected attack as Ares had hoped, but a carefully constructed play with Athena as the puppeteer. Nearly a year ago, Athena had learned of the war god's plans for a secret weapon, a weapon with which he hoped to bring down the Aegis wall. As an added insult, the weapon Ares planned to use was one that her old teacher had created. Athena closed her eyes and remembered the days that passed, of her time with the Sisterhood of Libra, a group dedicated to true justice and led by her mentor Themis. Half a millennia ago, the name Themis would have been enough to make Ares run back to his hole, but now the name is but a memory. Though her title was as goddess of divine justice, she was no goddess. She was a titan. Being one of the few titans to ally with Zeus and his brothers against their father Cronus, she had held her kingdom long after the Titan War, though she refused to join the Olympian Council. Until about 500 years ago, her country of Justitia was one of the mightiest. In the continent, which consisted of a large portion of the current Martian kingdom, and even small bits of Minerva, all that ended when Ares attacked and conquered Justitia, killing Themis in the process, or so Ares would have you believe. But Athena knew better. She knew that Themis would never fall to the likes of Ares. She knew a darker, more sinister mind acted as the conspirator of her former teacher's demise. Yet unintentionally, it was her beloved teacher's work that troubled her now. For Themis was more than just a fierce warrior. She was also a brilliant scientist in the field of biotechnology. Her work on molecular genetics and DNA manipulation were years ahead of her time. The creation of many breeds of chimeras could be traced back to her. But you see, when Ares captured her kingdom, he had taken her work as well. Though he lacked the intellectual capacity to appreciate them, he did understand their value and had kept her research safely tucked away. That was until 2 years ago. When he realized that the war with Minerva was at a stalemate, he had his scientists dive into Themis' old archives to find something to turn the tides of war. And unfortunately they did, a beast that could break the Aegis. Only very few people knew of this, including Odysseus and Daedalus. Though she would have preferred to have sent Odysseus to gather information on the beast, he was indispensable at the war front. But she still needed a mind who could understand the progress in the creature's growth, so she had to send Daedalus instead. That was what the old inventor was really doing when he was captured by Ares. On his return, what the inventor informed her was frightening. The creature was already well past adolescence and would be fully grown in another half a year, at which point nothing could stop it. This was the time when Athena had set her plans into motion. She had proposed the truce with the festival as an excuse, knowing full well that Ares would not honor his word. She had been dancing this dance with the war god for centuries and knew him well enough to know he would fall for the fake honeypot. Ares would see this as the perfect opportunity to attack, thinking that she was unprepared. But what the red god did not know was that her entire forces were battle-ready and waiting for him within Athens. The plans for the evacuation of her citizens were put in place well before the commencement of the festival. Athenian legions had already converted the entire city into a stronghold, though not everything had gone as she hoped. She had hoped that Ares would have to cross the mountains, leaving his men weak and weary before battle, but the war god's benefactor had helped him there with the storm. Though she knew the vanguard would lose the first skirmish, she had ordered them not to linger for too long in battle. Most of the vanguard had returned as planned, though Commander Leos was an unexpected casualty of war. Daedalus had once told her that no matter how well we calculate, love and war will always surprise us. That was what Leos had become, a miscalculation. But the thing she regretted the most was that her most trusted advisor would not be at her side as the two largest armies in the continent clashed in the morning. Maximus awoke to the sound of loud sirens outside. He looked at the wall-mounted monitor displaying 4:17 a.m. on it, in a dull green glow. He hadn't gotten a lot of sleep. Though he had tried to meet Achilles the night before, they weren't kidding about not being permitted to leave the West Tower anymore. The elevator had refused to take him to the tower exits. The doors just didn't open. Guess they were still considered a threat, especially now with a war at their doorsteps. Instead, he had headed back to his room to try and figure out the cube himself and had been up till 2 in the morning in doing so. But sadly, he had had no luck with it. The sirens sounded again outside, and Max knew he couldn't just lay there in bed no matter how badly he wanted to. When he stepped outside, he found Mia and Rex standing in the corridor as well. Hedger's room was empty, though. "What's going on?" Mia asked on seeing Max, but he had no clue as well. The three of them decided to head to the dining area, as it had the largest windows which offered a good vantage point of the city below and the fields around it. As they waited for the elevator, Max realized that he should probably patch up with Rex. He tried to talk with his old friend, but Rex merely mumbled responses. Fine, Max thought to himself. If he wants to be stubborn about this, then let him. When the elevator door opened and the three of them stepped out, Hedger was already there waiting in a chair. The sprite looked even more heavy-eyed than Maximus. "You all right, Hedge?" Mia asked. "Was up all night in the library, I'll explain later," Hedger said in a muffled voice. "But first you guys might want to take a look outside." The sirens blared again as the three of them headed to the window. To their dismay, what they saw was not a pleasant sight. From the far corners of the grasslands to the northwest of Athens, a sea of red was slowly swallowing the land whole. An 80,000-strong army was marching, getting closer to the city with every step. The army Max had once been a part of, an army fully clad in crimson, the largest army on the continent and led by the god of war. Ares had arrived. Sunlight was just beginning to creep into the sky, but it was enough for them to see the vastness of Mars's army. "Oh, Scrug, that's the whole damn thing," Rex said. "What?" Mia asked. "It's the entire army," Max answered. "Every single soldier Mars has to offer. Only the recruits and reserves must have been left in Thrace to guard it. Which means that right there is a host 80,000 strong coming towards us," Rex added. "The largest army in the continent is marching at us. Heck, the only forces larger than that in the world are of the big three." "What about Athena?" Hedger asked as he glided to their side. "Hers is second only to Mars, right?" "True, but her forces are only around 50,000 or so," Rex clarified. "You gotta understand Minerva has been holding Ares at bay because they never crossed over to Mars to attack. They were always on the defensive. Athena's been using the mountains and the valleys to her advantage as well. But if the armies were to clash in an open field like this, it would be a slaughter. Max knew this was true. When the difference in numbers were this high, there was no way Athens could win, no matter how many heroes Athena had up her sleeve. But he also knew that Athens had never been breached before. You're forgetting that Athena has the home field advantage, though. As long as the Aegis Wall stands, the fight is far from over, Max said. The four of them watched the slow march of the Crimson Army towards them as the alarms still blared outside. Rex's mechanical eye began to move and twist in and out of the socket. Max realized that the Minotaur was using his binocular mode. "Look who's leading the pack, it's our old friend Diomedes," Rex declared. Even though Max could not see the barbarian king himself, he could make out that the host was being led by a chariot with 4 horses. 4 man-eating horses, he had no doubt. Maximus was not surprised by this. He knew that the barbarian Diomedes had control over the infantry during war. In fact, Maximus knew this formation well. It was called the Wild Boar. Bringing up the vanguard was the cavalry unit. This consisted of the chariots with mounted machine gun turrets and horses with long lances in their riders' hands. Along with this were a large number of centaurs as well, who wielded shorter weapons such as axes and clubs. Close behind the cavalry were the light infantry. This was the largest unit by far and consisted of soldiers brandishing spears, swords, and the like. There were a few riflemen among them as well. If Maximus was still in the army, this is where he would be. After that came Rex's old unit, the heavy infantry division. This unit mostly consisted of orcs, minotaurs, and cyclopses. There were also a few large humans in the mix, but not a lot. They all wielded large two-handed weapons such as battle axes, warhammers, and huge swords. This was the entire division under the barbarians' command during battle. But the army was far from over. Lighter vehicles such as jeeps and trucks rode on either sides of the infantry, but the true force of the Martian army came behind it. The heavy vehicle division, consisting of armored trucks and tanks, then lumbered slowly behind the foot soldiers. Scattered among them were the dreaded RAM tanks, each twice as large and armored as regular tanks with twin barrels that cut its reload time by half. During war, all these vehicles would be under the direct command of Phobos, the god of terror. Then there was the long-range division. This division was split into 2 and was placed at a distance from the main army on either side. The 2 parts formed an arch-like pattern that resembled the tusks of a boar, and this is what the formation drew its name from. The ranged units stayed well behind the infantry and cavalry units, and the lighter vehicles would be sent to defend them if attacked directly. The long-range division consisted mainly of riflemen and centaurs whose bows were often more deadly than a gun. The rear of the unit had long-range anti-air guns as well. The small number of mages Mars had was also grouped with them, and the entire unit was led by the strongest mage in the army, Deimos, the god of fear. Up in the air above all this, Max could see traces of the final unit, Mars's Air Force. There were no helicopters or jetpacks as Athena had in this Air Force. Instead, the entire unit consisted of the Stymphalian riders. The Stymphalian birds, or rocks as they are more commonly called in Mars, were large flesh-eating birds of prey with bronze beaks and metallic feathers tough as steel. They were larger than horses and could be trained to be ridden into war. The Stymphalian riders were a unit that specialized in just that, and their brutality was infamous across the world. Being one of Lord Ares' most favored units, it was led by his sister Eris, the goddess of discord, a fierce rider herself. The morning sun had just risen, and with it, the 4 of them saw the large, ominous structure lumbering behind the army. In the darkness, Maximus had mistaken its silhouette for a hill, but now the light had revealed it to be a floating fortress of steel covering half the army under its shadow. The airship was hovering low, only a few feet from the ground, which gave it the feel of a castle being pulled forward by the might of the Crimson Army. "An airship," Mia said in shock. "I've never seen one before." "Not a lot of them in the world to see," said Rex. "That's no ordinary airship either. That right there is the Aethon, the war god's personal vessel." "Which means," Hedger said, as his weary eyes widened in fear. Max knew what it meant. In the 5 years the war had been going on, the Aethon had never crossed over into Minerva. Its arrival could only mean one thing, that Lord Ares has come to end the war once and for all. He would be doing it with his own hands. The Legions of Athena. Chapter 24. Theseus stood outside the northern gates of Athens, in full battle armor and his great axe already in hand. The champion stared across the plains, which grew redder by the second. Ares had already begun his first charge, and they would clash with him in a few moments. But Theseus was not worried. He was not alone. He had 4 of Athena's 8 legions standing behind him, awaiting his orders. The army had split itself into 4 large battalions, not legion-wise, but as a mix of the 7th, 5th, 4th, and 2nd legions combined. Each of their legion commanders were there too, except for Leos, who had already completed his duty. The 6th legion, consisting of healers and engineers, were inside the city, preparing it for the aftermath of battle. The 3rd legion was inside as well, but they were arming the turrets and city defenses from inside the Aegis, making sure that no one got too close. The 8th and the 1st legions were yet to be deployed. and would only enter the war when it was tactically necessary, as the goddess saw fit. Theseus watched as the war god's army approached closer and closer. He looked back to see his own forces geared up for battle. He wondered if he should say a few words to inspire them. But then he was never good with words. He was more of a man of action. He turned back to see a few Martian soldiers break formation and rush forward even faster than their front-line cavalry. But this was nothing new. He had seen this before. He tightened the grip on his battle axe. The axe was much larger than usual, with a 6-foot-long shaft and a crescent-shaped blade at its head, which extended into a long spike of tempered steel to the back. In his younger days, he had arrogantly named the axe the cattle prod to further enrage the Minotaur race, but he didn't care. He had no sympathy for the horned beasts. Their hatred for him was unchanged, as clearly visible now. For the few soldiers who had broken forward from their ranks to rush into battle were all Minotaurs. No doubt they knew Theseus would be the one leading Minerva in battle, and decided that they would be the ones to avenge the pride of their race. 4 of the hoofed soldiers had already broken far away from their main battalion and had nearly reached Theseus. The champion couldn't help but think, perfect. A few of the soldiers in front raised their spears and guns to shoot down the Minotaurs, but Theseus raised his axe, signaling them to halt, and moved forward to face them himself. He was not great with words or speeches, but this he could do. The first of the Minotaurs snapped up his neck on seeing Theseus and gave a huge roar. Then he proceeded to bring his enormous club down at the champion, but Theseus was ready. A quick parry to the left, and then slice. The axe had met its mark. The Minotaur no longer held the club, rather the soldier no longer had a hand to hold the club with. The beast whelped in pain, and Theseus pulled his axe back, allowing its spiked end to hack straight through its abdomen. The Minotaur was dead. The other 3 flinched at this sight, but whether they would have retreated or pushed on, one would never know, because Theseus was already on them. First he dug his axe into the skull of a female Minotaur, killing her instantly. Then he turned to the other 2. One of them tried to shoot him down with a machine gun, but it was useless. Guns were as effective as insect bites to demigods. Theseus didn't even flinch when he hacked off the shooter's head clean. The last one had dropped his own gun and decided to ram him with its horns. But Theseus stopped the bull with just one hand. Then with the other he brought his axe down on its back, smashing the Minotaur to the ground. Theseus walked back to his men as the beast bled to death. As he stared at his men, he knew that what he had done was more inspiring than any speech, but he decided to say some final words. "See how easily the war god bleeds before our might," he shouted. That was enough. Mars's forces had arrived, and they were met with the roar for victory from the legions of Athena. The first day of war had ended with the setting of the sun. This was a rule followed since the ancient times, even during the Titan War. The battles would end at sundown, giving both sides time to gather their fallen and help their injured. That night, hundreds of bodies would be burned with drachmas in their eyes. These were because ancient lore described the money as payment to the gatekeepers of the underworld. There were many who joked that the southernmost continent of Pluto was where all the souls departed to, and that its ruler Don Hades had become the richest man in the world by collecting all these drachmas. Maximus and the others had seen most of the war from the West Tower. The battle formations were broken apart within the first 15 minutes the troops made contact. They had seen how Theseus had taken down a few Minotaurs in the beginning, or rather Rex had seen with his bionic eye. This enraged him to no end, and he started ranting again. The barbarian Diomedes and Theseus had locked horns briefly in battle, but not long enough to claim a victor. They had to stop their battle midway, mainly due to more Minotaurs charging at Theseus. The fighting went on for hours. With no real results, Mars's forces had not broken through the first line of defense yet. The day ended with the Martians retreating to the camp they had built around the Athon, which had landed on the far end of the fields. Neither army had deployed their air units yet. Most of Mars's heavy units had been kept at bay by the large turrets within the city, which created large cavern on the path of the tanks. This also meant that the mecha units hadn't been deployed yet either, much to Hedger's disappointment. That night in the dining area, they were not greeted by Bricks or Goop, but rather 2 Athenian guards who told them they had to shift to the Great Hall, along with all the remaining civilians. All 4 of them were asked to pack up all their belongings and head down to the hall immediately. The Great Hall was a large room situated on the ground floor of the Owl's Nest, which was used for public gatherings and announcements. The hall was built to easily accommodate 10,000 people and had giant doors on 3 of its sides. The hall was usually kept empty to maximize the amount of people it could hold, but today, however, the entire hall had been turned into a makeshift camp. When Maximus and the others arrived, they were greeted by a hall fully packed with people. The floors were covered with endless rows of sleeping bags. Food was being served in corner stalls, with long lines of people waiting to be served. There were lines leading to outside the halls as well, to where the restrooms were. All around them people were moving about or finding beds for themselves. Some were huddled up together, others seemed as lost as they were. There were a few soldiers in uniform moving between the crowd, keeping the peace. "Find yourself a place to sleep and stay within the hall. These are your quarters till the war ends," one of the soldiers told them as they entered. So that's what they did. They scurried around like lost deer until they found 4 sleeping bags close to each other and dropped their luggage near it. "Well, this is different," Hedger said, sitting on his bag. "Don't know what good this will do me, though." Hedger, being a sprite, was not used to sleeping on the ground. He usually slept upside down on his tail like a bat, but that did not seem possible in the hall. "We might not be sleeping at all by the looks of it," Rex said. He was right. All around them they were greeted with glares. People murmured and stared as they passed, and no one seemed happy about it. A group of elves 2 bags away had shifted away on seeing them arrive. Maximus was really starting to miss the West Tower. Prison or not, he did not have to worry about people trying to kill him in his sleep there. The 4 of them tried to ignore the baleful looks, but it was getting harder by the second. A small crowd was gathering around them, and the ones in uniform were eyeing the situation nervously. Rex shifted his bionic hand from his normal claw mode to the hammer mode, which he used for battle. "Is that necessary?" Max shot at him. "I'm sorry, did these people look like they're about to throw you a parade?" Rex said. "You think drawing a weapon's making things calmer?" Max began. "Maybe if we just—" But Mia stamped him on the foot, cutting him off. "Will you 2 stop it? We have enough things to worry about without being at each other's throat," Mia said. Rex snorted angrily at this, then mumbled about getting dinner and left. People gave menacing stares as Rex passed, but no one did anything. No matter how angry they are, they would still think twice before going against a half-mechanical bull monster. "You didn't have to kick me," Max grumbled. "Well, I couldn't kick Rex. He wouldn't even feel it," Mia retorted. "Have you thought about not kicking anyone, maybe? You know your behavior is not very lady-like," Max responded. Mia's face grew pink at this. She got to her feet angrily and said, "And what makes you think I care if you see me as a lady?" before storming off to join Rex in the food queue. "What did I say?" Max wondered, confused. Hedger put his face on his palm and said, "Women are a mystery, my friend. Do you think you could jam your sword to a wall so I could hang on it to sleep?" Max just scowled at him. Mia and Rex had returned with 2 bowls each, but instead of goop, they were filled with regular vegetable stew. Though it wasn't very filling, it did taste a lot better than the castle's goop. They had just finished supper when a familiar voice found them. "What are you lot doing here?" It was Elisha, dressed in full battle gear. She was flanked on either side by 2 guards. "We were sent here," Max replied. Sure, Elisha did not look at him with loathing as before, but she still wasn't happy to see them. "Great, as if I didn't have enough problems to deal with here already," Elisha said. "Ma'am, they are under the direct orders of the goddess," one of the guards beside her said. "All the towers are to remain vacated till the end of the war." "All of them?" Elisha said, surprised. "Well, that's just more work for us. Anyway, move these 4 to a corner where they don't attract as much attention. Make it quick before the crowd gets in the mood for beef and pigeon soup." Rex got up angry at these words, but Elisha grabbed him by his one remaining horn and brought his snout near her face. "Now listen to me, Minotaur. I'm the one in command here. So when I give an order, I expect you to follow it. You got me, soldier?" She let go of Rex, then turned to the whole group and said, "And in here, I'm the only friend you got." It was the 2nd day of war, and none of them felt rested, least of all Hedger, who had tried to sleep curled up into a ball on the ground. The morning was no better. People still glared at them as they passed, and some had escalated to taunts and swearing. They tried for the most part to ignore everyone, but it was getting harder and harder, especially with the rumors of the war outside. News from the outside traveled fast through the hall, and Elisha hadn't been kidding. She was the only one helping Max and his friends in here. She moved them to the least populated corner of the hall, and even put a couple of soldiers on guard detail as well. She also kept them informed on what was happening outside whenever she could, and Max also overheard other things from the crowd. If he didn't know any better, he would say even his hearing had improved drastically. The 2nd day of war had been even more brutal, with Ares sending an even bigger host into battle. Theseus had held his post, but just barely. Luckily, the RAM tanks were still being held back by the cannon fire from the city, but Mars had begun a counter to that. Their long-range units had started firing smoke bombs at the Aegis wall, blocking the line of sight of the cannons. Maximus had no doubt Deimos was behind this. Of all the commanders of Ares, this was more his style. The aerial dogfights had begun as well, with Lady Eris leading the Stymphalian riders into battle. But the bronze-beaked birds proved to be no match for Icarus and his jetpack unit. The 8th Legion's helicopters and jetpacks had pushed the ROC troops back with terrifying efficiency, and all thanks to their leader, Icarus, who rumors told had been fighting like a man possessed after hearing about the death of his father. It seemed Icarus had managed to dismount Eris single-handed, forcing her and her troops to retreat. The battles had ended at sundown again, with Athens the victor, but their ranks thinned by the battle. "I have a question," Mia said. It was their 5th day in the hall, and 4 of them were huddled together around their sleeping bags in their corner. The crowd had lessened since when they first arrived, and most of the civilians had been evacuated by the morning. But the hall was still full. Those that remained were all those that would be helping with the war in the background, and none of them were any happier with Max and the others in anyway. So if the Aegis wall is impenetrable, why doesn't Athena just keep her forces inside it and attack from within? Why meet on the battlefield at all? Mia asked the others. "Because it isn't that simple," Rex replied. If Ares is not confronted in the field, his forces would surround the city and start laying a siege. Then it's only a matter of time before Athens is taken. Rex is right, Maximus explained. If Athens is surrounded, then they would cut off all transportation in and out of the city. That would mean no more supply of food and ammunition. There are no farms within the city. Ares would just have to wait and starve us out. Not to mention they would probably send troops after the civilians running south, Rex added. It's a bit more complicated than that, Hedger chipped in, looking up from his electronic reader. The e-reader was a gift from Daedalus to replace the phone he had broken. Seeing his newfound interest in the castle library, the old inventor had thought that a reader suited the sprite more. Hedger had converted and downloaded hundreds of books into it, which at least kept him busy. The Aegis wall is impenetrable as long as it stands, but it is still an energy barrier. I read in a book that if all the energy gets dissipated from continuous attacks, it would fall. Though it's going to take something phenomenally large to do that, Hedger said. Max nodded to this. He already knew this. Yeah, plus the Aegis wall is even stronger now. All the energy from the city is being fueled into the wall. That's why all the remaining people are being held together in halls like these to save power. Guess that's why they had to shut down the brick and goop machines as well, Mia figured, though she was not disappointed about that. Hold on, when did you turn into such an expert on all this? She asked Max. Elisha told me a couple of days back, Max replied. Nice to see the two of you getting along so well, Mia said, and Max felt a touch of annoyance in her tone. It was the 6th day of the war, and the mood within the walls was worse than ever. News had just arrived that Ares had broken through the front line. The ram tanks had made it through, and were currently bombarding the Aegis. Eris and her riders were doing better in the skies as well. Elisha was no longer in the hall. She had been charged with leading a section of the 1st Legion against the ram tanks. There were rumors that Phobos too had entered the battlefield in his monstrous form. Though not very bright, having been trained by Ares himself in the art of combat, he was perhaps Mars's deadliest warrior. Maximus could feel the tension rise within the hall as well. Everywhere he looked, he saw eyes filled with hatred against him. Elisha was not around to protect them either. It was supper time again, and the 4 of them were waiting in queue again, careful not to make any eye contact. All around them they were greeted with disdain, and few were quite verbal with their feelings, but the 4 of them ignored all of it dutifully. They had received their supper. It was cabbage soup and bread rolls today. They were just heading back when a woman in her late 50s blocked their path. It was clear that the lady had been crying not long before, but right now her face showed hardened resolve as she stared down at Maximus. Excuse me, Maximus began to say, but out of nowhere the woman spit into his bowl. Maximus dropped his bowl in shock, shattering it, and covering his feet in cabbage soup. Everything happened so fast after that. Max was still standing dumbstruck, clutching his bread rolls when the lady began to shout, "You killed my son! You killed my son!" and lunged at Maximus with a small knife. But Max acted fast and grabbed her before the knife made contact. In an act of self-defense, he pushed the lady back, which sent her crashing to the ground. That was when all hell broke loose. The crowd onlooking the fracas went mad with rage upon seeing this. People started throwing their food and other junk at the 4 of them. A young elf charged at Max with a metal pipe, aiming for his head, but what he got instead was Rex's right hoof dig into his chest, sending the youth spiraling away. It was like a full-on riot now. Rex had already changed his hand into hammer mode and was knocking back anyone who got too close. Hedger tried to fly higher as people kept trying to grab him from below. Mia had a small green barrier up, which at least helped block some of the projectiles sent hurling at them. Max's hand went for the hilt of his sword out of habit, but he did not dare draw it. The truth was, he hadn't drawn his blade since the fight at the tournament. Whatever he had done when he faced the Tyros, he had not been in control of it. If he drew his blade now, he did not know what the result would be. These wouldn't even be trained fighters he would be facing, just angry civilians. A few of the soldiers tried to interfere and bring the crowd under control, but not all of them. Some of them watched on or ignored the scene completely. The crowd kept up their aggressive assault until someone from a corner shouted, "Enough!" It was Elisha, and she had just entered through one of the side doors. She was dressed in uniform with her hair tied into a bun, and it was clear from the dirt and blood covering her body that she had just returned from battle, and she also held a new spear in her hand. She stormed through the crow to the center of the mess to where they were. Most of the people backed off on seeing her, but a few did not. One such brave soul tried to get Mia with his wooden cane, only to have Elisha slam his stomach hard with the shaft of her new spear. That got everyone's attention. "Do you all feel mighty taking on these 4 when they are defenseless?" Elisha shouted to the crowd. Her rage had made a vein pop on her forehead. "If all of you feel so entitled to war, I'll strap a piece of Kevlar on you and send you the battlefield tomorrow. Then we'll see how well you fare." Her words were met with utter silence. The crowd started to slowly disperse away. Elisha escorted the 4 of them back to their corner, all of whom were covered in blood, sweat, and cabbage soup. "Thanks," Max said when they finally reached their sleeping bags. "There's no need. I was just doing my duty," Elisha said. "Just survive the night here. Come tomorrow. I'll personally take you to the goddess and find better housing for you lot." The Legions of Athena. Chapter 25. Moonlight shone through the balcony windows of the Athon and into the throne room where Ares sat. He was not alone. Peering over the large maps laid out on the table was his sister Eris, while the terror god Phobos ranted on about their soldiers. Their champion Diomedes was also there, sitting in a corner on the floor as no chair was large enough for the man, but he said nothing. Not that he ever said anything useful in these meetings. Ares was barely paying attention to any of them. He sat with his eyes closed thinking. The war had proved tougher than he thought. He had not expected Athena to fare so well for so long, not to mention that his secret weapon still hadn't arrived. But he had hoped to drive the whole of Athena's army back inside the city well before it arrived. But they had managed to hold him off quite well, despite their smaller army. Even the skies had not been cleared yet for his new pet's arrival. He opened his eyes and turned his attention to his sister. Eris, why haven't the Stymphalian riders not taken the skies yet? That was a priority. Eris's face grew as crimson as her hair on these words. It is the inventor's son Icarus. His father's death did not weaken him as I had hoped. Instead, he is enraged, and his prowess in the air inspires his men. And you, dear sister, are you not capable of dealing with this mere boy? Ares shouted. Soon, my lord, Eris stammered. Perhaps if I had the long-range cannons supporting my riders from the ground. Impossible, Phobos interjected. The cannons are needed to blind the Aegis with smoke. My tanks cannot reach the battlefield if they are being bombarded by the city defenses. Once more, Eris and Phobos began arguing again. Lord Ares was just about to tell the two of them to shut up when the doors opened and Deimos entered. You're late, Deimos. What pray be your reason? Ares said through gritted teeth. Bringing you good news, my lord, the god of fear said, a smirk clearly visible under his red hood. The beast is ready and fitted for battle. It shall arrive on the morrow. A smirk appeared on the war god's face, and all his commanders had turned to him on hearing this news. Even Diomedes had risen off the floor to heed their leader's order. Ares sat himself straight and said, Phobos and Diomedes, I want all of your troops as close to the Aegis wall as possible tomorrow. Deimos, use your units to make certain that happens as well. Eris, I want you and your riders to protect it as it arrives. I don't want any unexpected surprises befalling it before it reaches the wall. Ares then got of his throne, his grin wider than ever and a mad lust in his eyes, and rejoice, my comrades, for tomorrow Athens falls. Once more Maximus and his crew were fully packed and on the move. This time they were on the top floor of the castle again, and Max was once again staring at the doors to Athena's throne room. They were waiting for Elisha, who true to her word had them out of the hall the first thing in the morning. They waited outside while people ran in and out of the throne room. The entire castle was bustling with movement, which was good because this meant no one gave them a second glance. As they waited, they could also hear the sounds of skirmish from outside. The battle had already begun. When Elisha did arrive, she had no time for greetings either. Come on, we have to make this quick. I was needed in the barracks 5 minutes ago, she said. The doors opened and they stepped into the throne room, which looked nothing like before. The metal walls and the dome-shaped glass roof were the same, but everything inside it had changed. Athena's throne with her owl and olive branch symbol was nowhere to be seen. Instead, right in the center of the room was a large round table, with a holographic projection of the battlefield outside. The circular walls were all lined with computers, each one concentrating on a different aspect of battle, and manned by soldiers in uniform, too involved in their work to notice anything else. There were also large floating monitors which showcased live feeds from the war zone. Maximus wasn't surprised by this. Mounted cameras had been used by armies for over a century now to help the top brass get a better perspective of the battle. Mars used them as well, and they had been used even during the Trojan War, although the technology had vastly improved since then. Max remembered watching Achilles' final battle with Hector a long time ago, but the footage was in black and white and grainy, not to mention the entire fight was taken in a single camera. But here on the monitors, the battles were being seen in full color and all its gruesome detail. In fact, Minerva had devices called cambots that looked like a floating sphere with a camera poking out of it. These devices floated around mapping the entire war zone, even the skies. Among the people present, there were familiar faces. The goddess Athena was sitting on a chair near the round table intensely watching one of the screens, and right beside her stood Odysseus, Achilles, and an elfin woman Maximus remembered as Lady Pallas. When they approached, it was Lady Pallas who spoke first. Elisha, glad you came. Your mecha's repairs have been nearly completed. You should be able to rejoin the battle by noon. Then, as an afterthought, she added, should they be here? Indicating the others. Well, they can't stay in the halls. Nearly caused a riot yesterday, Elisha said. Just clear one of the rooms in the lower floors for them now, Odysseus said. No, said Athena. Let them stay here. Everyone turned to the goddess, but Athena's own eyes stayed fixed firmly on Maximus. Max realized that their last meeting was more than strange, and wondered if having them here had anything to do with it. Is that necessary? Achilles asked. They can't help us. Perhaps, Athena said. But knowingly or not, they have been involved with the events that led to this war. Perhaps fate wants them to witness the outcome of this war as well. All the while, the goddess had not taken her eyes off Maximus, and when she finally did, she turned to the screen, leaving no room for further discussion on the matter. Soon the goddess was back to giving orders to her subordinates. "Put your things somewhere and stay out of the way," Odysseus told them, and it was clear from his expression that he too was confused by Athena's words. Elisha left soon after that, and the four of them awkwardly stood around trying not to draw attention. After a while, though, Maximus decided to take the goddess's advice and watch the monitors. Maximus watched the war in all its vivid detail. Soldiers clashed at each other with their lives on the line, the clatter of swords and spears and hammers all around them. Bullets sprayed across the field and there was blood everywhere. The sight of a soldier being stabbed through his chest plate reminded Max of Daedalus, and he had to look away. Whenever he tried to think of the old inventor's death, his head would hurt and he would feel sick. But the thought reminded him of the cube and how he had still not given it to Achilles. He had been so busy with the war they hadn't even seen each other all week. On one of the monitors, Theseus and Diomedes had found each other in the field. The barbarian king had dismounted from his chariot and let loose his 4 man-eating horses, and the beasts stormed, finding any who had fallen in battle, regardless of the color of their uniform, and digging into them. Both the champions had their axes and were waving at each other with such might that the shockwave from each hit pushed others back. But neither had the upper hand. Both seemed to be on equal footing in battle. "Send me in. I can take out the barbarian," Maximus overheard Achilles saying. He was a few feet away and talking to Odysseus. Max concentrated hard on hearing the conversation while not appearing to be eavesdropping. "There is no way I'm sending you out there," Odysseus said. "I have fought him before. He is no challenge," began Achilles. "He may not be, but this is war. Have you forgotten what happened back in Troy, before your fight with Hector? I fought Hector without the rage. I was in control," Achilles shot back. "After how long? And don't tell me you were in control. You may have held the rage at bay during that battle with your pride, but its effects still lingered," Odysseus argued. "You dragged his corpse behind your chariot, in front of his loved ones, in front of his kingdom. Was that you in control? That was over a century ago," Achilles said. "Don't take me for a fool, old friend. I've seen you meditating for hours on end. I saw your rage surface at the sight of Apollo and Helen," Odysseus said. "There is a reason you retired. I am sorry you are more useful here advising the goddess than out on the battlefield." Achilles was about to respond, but something on one of the monitors caught his attention. Maximus turned to see as well. On screen, no less than 30 ram tanks were heading straight for the defensive lines of the Minervian forces. They were led by a monster that stood tall at 20 feet with long, wild black hair, bronze skin, and arms as large as tree trunks. In one hand it held a bloody club covered in large spikes. The other held a large high-caliber machine gun that was so big it was usually mounted as the primary weapon on the back of jeeps. He wore red armor with gold lining like the rest of the army, and a large shoulder guard made from the skull of some hideous monster. It looked like something that had escaped from a nightmare, but Maximus knew it was no monster but rather a god. Phobos, the god of terror, had entered the war in his true form. "Looks like he's finally here," Odysseus said. "Pallas, is my suit ready?" "Fully charged and awaiting you in the dock. Argos as well," Pallas said. "Then I better be off for my date with the god of terror," Odysseus said with a smile, addressing the room, and with that he left for battle. The Legions of Athena. Chapter 26. Odysseus sat in the cockpit of his mecha making his final calibrations, checking the output of the machine before battle. As he entered the launch coordinates into the system, he realized just how much war had changed. Not too long ago he had been in another war, one which history books said that his army was victorious in. But Odysseus knew better. He knew that the Trojan War had no victors. The Trojan War is called as the last war of mortals, and with good reason. It marked the end of the kingdom of men. You see, the Greek continent was the last of the continents to hold on to monarchy. Every other continent had already been claimed by a god before the Trojan War began. Though the official reason for the war was the abduction of Helen by Paris, the war itself had deeper roots. The Greek continent consisted of many smaller kingdoms under civil unrest. But with the abduction of Helen, one man saw it as an opportunity to unite the Greeks once and for all, the leader of the assault on Troy, Agamemnon, the king of Argos. He firmly believed that uniting the remaining free cities of men was the only way they would survive in the world of gods. He may have been right, but one would never know. For even though the Greeks had won against Troy, the result was not what they had hoped for. Odysseus himself had been lost at sea for 10 years on his way back from the war. When he had arrived home, instead of a united kingdom, he found petty kings bickering and at the brink of another civil war. Agamemnon himself had been driven mad in the aftermath of the war. With his downfall, the hope for a united kingdom died as well. It didn't take long after that for the Olympian Council to deem the continent unfit for human rule. Dionysus, the youngest among the Olympian gods, had claimed the lands for himself under the order of the god King Zeus. Today, the Greek continent is no more. Argos, Troy, and his own kingdom of Ithaca were all united into the country of wine, Bacchus. Odysseus had reached outside the Aegis and his mecha was ready for battle. Just the sight of his machine sent waves of cheers across the battlefield. He wasn't alone. At his side was another mecha, but unlike his own machine, this one was not humanoid in nature. Instead, it was built in the shape of a dog. Unlike the other mechas, this one was unmanned. Instead, it ran on one of the most advanced artificial intelligence systems in the world. The AI had been developed by Athena and Daedalus together in the hope of replacing soldiers altogether one day. But sadly, the AI was limited to just this one mecha for now, and entrusted to Odysseus as his partner in battle. Odysseus named it Argos after a very loyal dog he had back when he was still king of Ithaca. When Odysseus returned home after being lost at sea for 10 years, no one had recognized him, not even his own wife and children. Except for old Argos, that is, who realized who he was immediately. So the warrior could not think of a better name for his partner than that of his most loyal companion. War raged around them, but nothing Mars had to offer could match the might of his mecha. With his enormous circular shield, shoulder turrets, and huge lance, nothing was a challenge. Even the dreaded ram tanks turned to mere chew toys to Argos's razor-sharp teeth. But it wasn't tanks or soldiers that he had come to face. His adversary had spotted him and marched forward to face him in combat, and he was a god. All around them, the fighting stopped as the two behemoths faced each other in battle. On one side stood a 20-foot-tall machine of bronze and iron, the peak of technology itself, manned by a tested veteran of tremendous intelligence, Odysseus. On the other stood a monster of thick bronze skin and blood-red eyes, the very personification of terror, Phobos. Neither spoke, but both knew. Today, only one would survive. It was Phobos who attacked first. He lunged forward with his great club straight for the head, but Odysseus would not fall prey to such an obvious attack. He blocked it with his shield instantly. Odysseus did not enjoy battle, but one would never guess that from the way he fought. While most combatants relied on strength or speed in battle, the erstwhile king of Ithaca fought with a very specific skill, precision. Phobos kept at the attack. He slammed his club down repeatedly on the shield. Odysseus kept his guard up and his shield high. He was known for his patience in battle, but he couldn't wait forever. The terror god's strength was truly immense, and his shield had already dented. But luckily, Phobos did not try to vary his attack pattern. Even after observing that his blows were not penetrating the defense, he still kept at it stubbornly. But others didn't share his tenacity. A ram tank had just positioned itself to the right with a clear shot at Odysseus, but before the gunner could pull the trigger, a set of metal teeth cut through the dual cannons of the tank. Then, with a graceful leap, Argos had fired at the tank, reducing it to rubble. Argos circled the two giant combatants on Odysseus's orders to ensure nothing else interfered. With that, Odysseus readied to strike. Phobos was tiring from his strikes, and Odysseus saw that. He noticed a pattern as well, 2 consecutive hits followed by a harder third strike. That was his opening. The hard strike came, and Odysseus tilted his shield just enough to make his club clear to the side. In one fluid movement, his lance sliced precisely at the god's neck. That might have been the end of it, but Phobos had been in countless battles as well. He jerked his neck to the side on instinct, but the lance did not miss completely. Odysseus left a long gash to the side of the terror god's neck. His blade had went straight through, chopping off clumps of his long wild hair. Phobos withdrew, dropping his club to the ground. His hand went straight to cover his neck, which was bleeding profusely. He couldn't believe it. He had smacked at least 30 strikes on the Athenian, but he had managed to draw first blood with just one. Phobos was enraged by this. He readied his machine gun and blasted it towards Odysseus, forcing him to take cover behind his shield. Inside the mecha, Odysseus took a deep breath. His power was down to 73%. Though his shield had taken most of the damage, the machine's arm had been strained as well. But Phobos had reacted just as he had suspected. Blinded by rage, he was emptying his bullets at Odysseus. Odysseus had noted his gun. It was nothing special. It would not pierce his mecha's armor, and more importantly, it had a finite amount of bullets. With a final click, Phobos had run out of ammunition. That was the moment Odysseus decided to finish this. He dropped his shield and aimed his lance straight at Phobos. The terror god realized his folly. His gun was empty and his club was too far away, but he would not fall so easily. He blocked the lance with his machine gun, but the spear pierced straight through. The move had forced it to miss its mark and hit the god's shoulder instead. Phobos grabbed the lance, hoping that would end the attack, but Odysseus had other plans. His shoulder cannons fired straight at the terror god, and at such a close range it sent the 300-ton monster reeling to the ground. This would have been enough to kill most mortals and monsters, but Phobos was a god. He got up again drenched in blood, his arms clenched for a fistfight, but Odysseus was not. Worried, 10 more minutes and the god would fall. But that's when he heard it, a roar that deafened the entire battlefield. Maximus was watching Odysseus on screen when he heard it, when they all heard it. The ungodly roar that seemed to stop time itself. Everyone froze on hearing it, from the techs monitoring inside the room to the soldiers out on the battlefield. Everyone raised their eyes to the sky to see its origin, and there it was. From the northwest corner of the sky, something had just dropped from the clouds, heading towards the city of Athens. Maximus had never seen anything like it. It was big. No, that was an understatement. It was immense, enormous, gigantic. It moved through the sky easily, larger than a blue whale. It was shaped like a whale as well, at least its front was. But where a whale would end with its tail fin, this creature's extended out into a long snake-like tail. It also had 6 large flippers that slowly moved in the air, mimicking wings. Its entire body was covered in brown leathery skin that mimicked those of reptiles, and a long snout filled with teeth the size of a truck. It had something strapped on its wide snout as well, a humongous iron battering ram, held in place by chains tied across its body, and it was aimed straight at the city. The room had fallen under an eerie silence, and Athena was the first to whisper, "It has arrived." Is that a dragon?" Hedger said, trembling at the sight of the beast. "I wish it was just a dragon," Athena said. "That is something much more ancient, a serpent dragon." Maximus had no idea what that was, but when a goddess wished to face a dragon instead of that thing, he knew it was time to be concerned. "A drakon, but they are supposed to be extinct," Mia said. "Yes, from what I remember the last one was slain a while back by Hercules. The tale has been immortalized in his 12 labors," Achilles said calmly. Maximus had no idea how Achilles kept his cool. He knew the story Achilles mentioned. Hercules had slain a great beast in order to retrieve some sort of mythical treasure called the Golden Apple of Hesperides. But he had always assumed the creature in the tale was a dragon, not a monstrosity like this. They were, Athena said, but a brilliant scientist had unlocked the key to reviving them. Sadly, she was killed before her work came into fruition. What remained of her research fell into the hands of Ares. "Can the Aegis Wall withstand something like that?" Lady Pallas asked the goddess. Athena was stone-faced and didn't answer. Instead, she spoke into her microphone, and her message was broadcast to her entire war host. "Everyone retreat into the city. All units are to stay within the Aegis Wall." That is an order. The ground forces didn't need telling twice. The entire Minervian army was retreating into the city limits. Even Odysseus was forced to head back before finishing his battle with the terror god. All the while, the serpent dragon slowly flew closer to Athens, covering the fields below under its shadow. The army was back inside and with nothing to oppose them. Ares had moved his troops as close to the Aegis as they could, as they waited for the drakon to arrive. Athena watched as one of her mentor's creations moved towards them, as a harbinger of the end. The drakon was the ace up Ares' sleeve, his answer to breaking the Aegis, and Athena knew the beast just might do the trick. As the drakon got closer, she ordered the city's cannons to fire at the beast, but the shots didn't even make it flinch. She could feel the tension in the room and the fear in the eyes of her men. She had just ordered a retreat and allowed Ares to position his men too close to the city. Her men were losing hope. The drakon let out another hideous roar as it inched closer to the city. The cannons were ineffective. Icarus and his 8th Legion had tried their luck as well, but nothing. Athena sat with her hand on her forehead, rubbing her temple lightly. The beast would arrive at her doorsteps within 15 minutes, and she knew what she had to do. "Pallas, ready the suit," Athena said, getting off her chair. "I will handle this personally." The Legions of Athena. Chapter 27. Athena hovered high above her capital city, beyond the Aegis Wall. She used her powers of levitation to stay afloat as the wind swept through her flowing brown hair. The display of her prowess would have made her appear like an angel with her ageless grace and sharp silver eyes, that is, if she had not been dressed in a metal suit. Athena had a mecha of her own, though it mainly functioned as a suit of armor. Unlike the other mechas, which all stood 20 feet proud, hers didn't even reach 10. This was because, unlike the others, she did not require a power source, or most of the mechanical components fitted into the others. She powered the mecha herself using her own powers. The heavy armor moved smoothly with the help of telekinesis. Along with the blue and gray armor, she also held a long spear taller than herself in one hand and her helmet in the other. She wore her helmet and moved forward in the air, ready to face the drakon. The drakon was right in front of her, larger than life, but she was not afraid. She had faced such huge monsters before. Centuries ago, when her coasts were being raided by Admiral Poseidon, she had met his pets that dwelled in the seas. She stood between her city and the fearsome beast calculating her move, but a distraction had just come her way. The Stymphalian riders had been flying in close proximity to the drakon, acting as a sort of guard for the beast. On spotting Athena, the bronze-beaked birds and their riders peeled away from their formation to face the goddess. They were being led by Eris herself. "Athena," Eris shouted, "I am pleased you have come out from hiding to die at my hands." She rode her mount straight at Athena, firing the machine gun at her as she did. But the shots had no effect. They didn't even dent Athena's armor. But Eris was far from done. She put aside her gun and decided to charge at her instead. This is when Athena raised her free hand and clenched her fist. Eris stopped dead. Her bird had come to a halt, and so had she. It was as if someone had bonded her in chains. It dawned on Eris it was Athena's doing. She was using her telekinesis to bind her, trying to crush her. With it, Eris was strong enough not to be broken by this. She too was a goddess after all. But the same could not be said about her bird. She could see its wings crippling and hear the sound of its bones breaking. It did not survive. "Out of my way, weakling," Athena ordered. With a toss of her hand, she sent Eris tearing to the ground below. But Eris had some luck. She jumped of her now dead mount onto another Stymphalian bird flying close by. She then threw its rider to his death and took control of the beast. However, she didn't head back for another attack. Instead, the goddess of discord beat a hasty retreat and the other riders followed. They knew they were no match for an Olympian god. But enough time had been wasted. The Drakon had arrived. Now that it was close enough to the city, it began its charge. It attempted to smash its metal ram straight into the Aegis, but before it could make contact, it was intercepted by a force which shoved it to the side. Athena had used her telekinetic energy to halt the Drakon's advance, and even though her push was not enough to hurt the creature, it had definitely caught its attention. The Drakon coiled around now, changing its target. It had its ram aimed straight at the goddess now. Athena knew she had to go on the offensive now, so she closed her eyes and began her summon. 2 spears identical to the one she was holding appeared on her either side. Then the 2 became 10, the 10 became 100, and the 100 became 1,000. Soon there she was, with 10,000 spears forged from tempered steel floating around her, moving according to her will. A children's tale spoke of how a long time ago a weaving contest was held between Athena and the spider witch Arachne for the control of Minerva. The truth behind the story was a bloody war between the two that lasted for a month, which ended with Arachne's death. The reason the tale had been replaced with a weaving contest when narrated to children was because of the technique Athena had used to kill the Spider Queen, the 10,000 Needles of Athens. The same technique she used to prove her weaving skills would be used again to end the Drakon. The beast took little notice of the thousands of spears spiraling around the goddess and charged headfirst at the goddess. Athena began manipulating her needles. Soon they formed a circle of an enormous diameter around the goddess, with her as the center. The beast was not smart enough to notice the trap. As it drew closer and opened its jaws to swallow the goddess whole, Athena dodged upward into the sky, leaving the Drakon right in the middle of the circle of spears. Then, with a smirk, Athena clenched her raised fist. The circle began to grow smaller, and soon 10,000 spears pierced straight into the serpent Drakon from every single side. The beast howled in pain and squirmed, but it still stayed afloat. But Athena was not done either. She began to manipulate her needles again. She pulled them out of the monster's flesh and slammed them into it again and again and again. Each one of her needles were acting as a sewing machine, repeatedly pushing its needle in and out of the Drakon's body. The Drakon roared and flailed as it began to literally sweat blood. Its 6 flipper-shaped wings were flapping erratically, but it wasn't enough. The spears were just too small. The beast was still alive. In its blinding pain, it spotted Athena, though. With its long tail, it struck Athena like a whip. Athena had not expected the tail to be so quick. She tried to dodge, but the tail was too wide to escape. It slammed into her, sending her tumbling to the ground. But she used her powers to steady herself before she hit the dirt. But another problem arose. The beast had slammed her straight into the jaws of a ram tank battalion. 8 tanks stood aiming their cannons at the goddess. But Athena scoffed at the mighty ram tanks and decided to use them to her advantage instead. She used her telekinesis on the tanks, and soon the mighty war machines were floating in the air, unable to fire their weapons. Then Athena hurled all the tanks straight at the Drakon. They exploded on hitting the beast, acting as grenades befitting the great beast, but the Drakon still flew. The beast had coiled around again, bloody and battered. It had decided to leave Athena for later and finish its mission instead. So once again, the beast rammed straight for the Aegis wall. Athena tried to distract it again by launching more tanks and trucks at it, but the beast did not sway from its path. It barreled through the sky, going straight through the sea of needles Athena put in its path. Athena tried to push it aside again, but the Drakon persevered this time. It kept on heading straight at Athens with unshakable vigor until finally, slam! The Drakon had hit the Aegis wall. A shock wave spread through its surface. The blue tinge of the barrier had begun to fluctuate, and still the wall hadn't been broken. But not for long. The Drakon kept on pushing. The barrier began to sizzle and produce static. The beast kept smashing into the wall until suddenly it stopped. The Drakon shook its head in frustration, but it could not move. Its flipper wings stopped moving as well, and its coiling tail had straightened out completely as well, stretching its full length to the back. Then amazingly it began moving back. The sight was bewildering. The Drakon itself did not understand what was happening. It was as though someone had grabbed the enormous monstrosity by its tail and pulling it back. Someone was doing just that, Athena. It was unbelievable. A creature bigger than the castle, the owl's nest, bigger than the airship Athon, was being pulled back by Athena using only her mind. But the strain was apparent on the goddess. She was using all her strength for this task. All her needles had fallen to the ground, and her nose was bleeding profusely. She knew she couldn't hold out for long, so she pushed the beast to the side. It didn't do much, but it did buy her some time. She flew close to the Aegis barrier as the Drakon began to coil around again, readying for its next attack. Athena stretched her arm out again to use her telekinesis, but this time it was not aimed at the Drakon, but instead at her own castle, the Owl's Nest. The castle was built right in the center of Athens, where it shone as a beacon of hope for its people. The glass dome roof castle also had 5 towers connected to it, each with a conical roof. What most people did not know was that these towers were constructed separately and then connected to the castle so that they would have no role to play in the structural integrity of the castle itself. These 5 towers ranged from the smallest, the West Tower, to the largest of the group, the Talon Tower. They were the pride of the castle, and Athena herself was extremely fond of them. But more importantly, Athena had ordered all the towers to be evacuated at the start of the war. The entire castle began to shake as if struck by an earthquake. Then one by one the towers began to break away from the castle and into the sky. The towers now stood floating high above the city and beyond the Aegis wall. This was not an enemy attack of any sort, though. Athena had just grabbed the last 5 needles in her collection to weave the tale of the Drakon and the goddess. 5 giant spear-shaped towers were being held in the sky by the goddess of Athens, and the strain it placed on her was enormous. She knew she could not fight for much longer and had to end this quickly. The Drakon had noticed the airborne towers and roared at them on instinct. It had spotted the one controlling them as well and decided to go after Athena again. It charged with its mouth open and its razor teeth ready to rip the goddess to shreds, and that's when Athena made her move. The 5 towers shot forward like rockets at the monster. The first went for a flipper wing, decapitating it in the process and abruptly stopping the Drakon's assault. 2 more towers curved and pierced the beast through the underbelly. The Drakon roared in pain, but then Athena sent the smaller West Tower straight into the Drakon's mouth, shutting it up. The serpent Drakon reared upwards in an attempt to free itself from the towers, and that was the opening Athena needed. She sent the largest, the Talon Tower, straight for the Drakon's chest, where it pierced clean through the beast's heart. That was it. The owl's talon had caught its prey, and the serpent Drakon was dead. But Athena was not done yet. As the corpse of the great flying serpent began to fall to the ground below, Athena flew straight at it and rammed her spear into the beast's forehead. With all the strength she had left, she steered the body to the ground, straight into a large battalion of the Martian forces, killing hundreds of the Crimson soldiers instantly under the weight of the monster's corpse. When the dust and smoke from the behemoth's fall cleared, there stood Athena on top of the dead beast, her spear in one hand and her helmet in the other, with the wind carrying her straight long hair. Many of the Martian soldiers had their weapons aimed at the goddess, but not a single one dared to make a move. Behind this, the gates to Athens opened again, and waves of Minervian soldiers returned to the battlefield led by Odysseus and Theseus. Athena took one final look with her sharp eyes at the crimson horde in front of her and pronounced, "The war is over." The Legions of Athena, Chapter 28. In the war room in Athens, the mood had shifted dramatically. Cheers of victory and celebration were echoing from every corner. Maximus and the others were also there, sighing in relief. Whatever ill will the people bore towards them seemed to have been forgotten for the moment. The Minervians were all busy congratulating each other, and Achilles as well. Max and the others moved to a corner and out of everyone's way, but they too were glad that Athena had been victorious. Maximus still couldn't believe the battle he had just witnessed. The Gambots had captured everything, and he was still in awe of the power Athena possessed. Regular gods had paled in comparison to the Olympian 12. "Guess we won't be heading back to our rooms then," Mia said with a smile. "Good riddance to that. The rooms were so freaking small. I couldn't move in them without scraping my horn on something," Rex said. They had all been a little frightened when the towers were taken, but the castle still stood strong, admittedly 5 towers lesser and with gaping holes on the walls. But honestly, Max was just glad he wasn't back in the West Tower when it happened, and a bit disappointed he would never be able to enjoy all the games he'd been playing in its recreation room. "You'll be missing the library, I suppose?" Max asked Hedger. "Yeah, pity. All those books wasted. Glad I saved at least one of them," Hedger said, patting his backpack. Max looked at him pointedly and waited for an explanation. "You know that title-less book I was obsessed with? I may or may not have rescued it from the tower before we left," Hedger admitted sheepishly. "You stole it? But why didn't you just make a digital copy?" Max asked, a bit annoyed. "I did, but there's something about that book I just can't shake. So I kept the original just in case," said Hedger. Maximus couldn't believe his ears. "How did you even take it out of the library? I thought they had security systems to prevent that." "It seems my quill key works on electronic locks as well," Hedger said with a grin. "You have a quill key?" Mia interjected in surprise. "Yeah, made from my own wing feather even." "But how did you make it?" "Quill keys are extremely hard to craft. It would take a lot of magical skill to make one. Not to mention they're illegal," Mia said. "I didn't make it myself," Hedger said. "An old warlock made it for me. Must be a pretty powerful warlock." "Who was it?" Mia asked, excited. "We just called him Tim," Hedger said. "Tim?" Rex snorted. "You mean that crazy old man from the trenches, always hanging out with that big dumb bloke, Arthur? Can't believe he's a real warlock. Always assumed that was a bluff." "The very same," replied Hedger. "That's not the point," Max bellowed. "Hedge, you can't just start taking stuff. It's wrong. It's not like the people here have any love for us to begin with." But Hedger's moral lesson would have to wait. As just then the doors opened and Athena entered, flanked on either side by Odysseus and Theseus. The room exploded with cheers on their arrival, and the people were chanting Athena's name. Athena greeted them with a smile, but it was easy to see she was in bad shape. The battle had taken quite a toll on the goddess, and she was eager to find a seat. Odysseus walked up to Achilles with a wide grin and said, "Told you I could handle it without you." "You mean Athena could," corrected Achilles. "Just as well. The important thing is the war is as good as done. We'll still need to mop up a bit, of course, but Ares has lost nearly half his army." Odysseus said, "That's still more than what you have," observed his friend. "True, but all the good that will do with the age is still standing. They can huff and they can puff, but it'll do them no good," Odysseus said, reassuringly slapping Achilles on the shoulder. Achilles too believed the war was over, but Ares had still not called a retreat. His forces were still standing on the outskirts of the city, using the corpse of the fallen Drakon as cover. He knew that this was just Ares being stubborn and refusing to show weakness despite having lost his trump card. But the sooner the Martians left this country, the better. After all, the Trojans had thought they had won the war right before the Omega-7 sneaked into their city inside a wooden horse. "You really have become quite the cynic, haven't you?" Odysseus said, seeing the hesitation on his comrade's face. "There's a reason they call the stories from our old homeland as Greek tragedies, my friend. We rarely get a happy ending," Achilles said with a slight smile. "Perhaps that's because you refuse to find it," Odysseus said. "How long are you going to keep running, meditating every second you're awake?" Achilles knew where he was going with this. "I already told you. You're as stubborn as ever. Just listen," Odysseus cut in. "Athens could be your home as I made it mine, and don't look at me like I'm offering you charity. We lost Daedalus, and 3 legion commanders including Leos. We could really use you. Command one of Athena's legions. I do not wish to be a soldier again, Odysseus." "So you plan to wander the earth till the end of time?" "If not for yourself, do it for them," Odysseus said, looking at Max and the others. "If you become commander, Max can enroll as your tyro. I can make that happen, and the gods know the boy can fight. And the others too, they're still young. They could have a life here. They won't stay here without you. You always did inspire loyalty in people." "A life here? Because the people of Athens have treated them with nothing but kindness since they arrived?" Achilles asked sarcastically. "The people of Athens are just going to have to live with it," the general said. "Especially once we start taking in more Martians." Achilles was confused by these words. He waited for an explanation. "It's highly classified information," Odysseus confided, lowering his voice. "But there is currently a rebellion in Mars." "A rebellion?" Odysseus nodded. "And you lot may have had something to do with it. Ares did not take losing Daedalus from captivity lightly. It seems he decided to vent his frustration on his people. He came down hard on the slums surrounding his cities." "You mean the trenches?" "Yes, along with other cities in Mars, but Thrace was the main focus. Since most of the trade in the trenches are illegal in one way or the other, Ares shut most of them down, making it impossible for the people to make a livelihood. Not to mention, he started forcibly recruiting people to form a reserve army." "And this has started a rebellion, you say?" Achilles asked. "The rebellion has been simmering for years now. Not surprising, because the way Ares rules, he was never very popular. But the recent events have added fuel to their cause. Now their numbers are on the rise every day." "But what does it have to do with Athens?" asked Achilles. "Their leaders contacted us recently, asking Athena for help, hoping she could take in refugees. Those were too old or too young to be involved. Also requesting for any sort of support for their cause," replied the general. "And Athena agreed to this? You know how she is, always fighting for those too weak to fend for themselves," Odysseus said with a sigh. "It was an unpopular decision among the top brass, but the goddess wouldn't hear any of it. She said she would do what she saw as justice." Achilles had to agree that did sound like Athena. Unlike most gods, she truly did care about people. Often her kindness did stretch further than to just her subjects. "Of course, we couldn't do anything till now because we were busy with the war," Odysseus continued. "But now that it's over, the goddess plans to help the rebellion in any way she can." Maximus had just joined the 2 veterans. It was easy to tell something was on his mind. "Achilles, may I have a word in private?" he requested. "Just as well," Odysseus said with a smile. "The soldiers seem to have got their hands on a few drinks. I think I'll help myself to one." He patted Max on the shoulder and left to join a group of soldiers. "What's on your mind?" Achilles asked. "Not here, somewhere less crowded," Max replied. Achilles nodded and the 2 of them left the place. They found a small empty room on the same floor with just a table and a few chairs and stepped inside. Only once had he closed the door did Max take the object out of his pocket. "Daedalus's necklace?" Achilles asked. Maximus nodded. "His last words were about this. He told me to give it to you. The cube in the center, he instructed to destroy it." "What is it?" Achilles asked. "I was hoping you knew," replied Max. Achilles took the necklace from him and removed the cube from it. He returned the rest of the necklace to Max. He gave the cube a quick examination, placed it on the table, and drew his blade. "Wait, that's it? Don't you at least want to find out what it is?" Max asked. "Daedalus wanted it destroyed. That's enough reason for me. What it is does not matter." His blade began to glow blue. Then with one swift strike he brought it down on the cube. The table below got sliced into half when the blade made contact, but amazingly the cube remained intact. Achilles took it off the floor to examine it. Not even a scratch, Max said in amazement. The quest might be a bit harder than expected, Achilles said. Perhaps more information on it would be necessary. Any ideas on where to start? Max asked. Achilles stroked his stubble and said, Once we got back from Mars, Daedalus had told me that Ares hadn't captured him only because of his relationship with Athena, that he was searching for something. And you think this could be it? Quite possibly, Achilles surmised. He then pocketed the cube and told Max that he did not need to worry about it, that his job was done. He then began to walk away, but as he reached the door, he turned to Max and asked, How would you feel about living in Athens? Maximus thought for a second and replied, I wouldn't mind. Are you sure? Achilles asked. The people may never grow fond of you here. It won't be easy. With a weak smile, Max said, Life has never been easy. As Achilles stepped out, he realized Odysseus was right. Maximus did remind him of Patroclus. Maximus sat down on a chair once Achilles left and sighed in relief. He had been worried about the cube, but Achilles would know what to do. He realized that he still held the rest of the necklace in his hand, and it was far from plain. It still had 4 oddly shaped rocks on them, with symbols etched into them. Alchemic runes, Mia had called them, but the necklace looked incomplete without something in the middle. But then Max had an idea. He took something else from his pocket. It was the pocket watch. It was still broken, and the dial inside had been permanently stained red by the blood of the inventor, but he still strung it onto the middle of the necklace where it hung like a medallion. Maximus decided to hold onto this necklace to remind him on how he had been too weak and powerless to save one of his friends. He promised himself he would never be that powerless again, no matter what it took. The Legions of Athena, Chapter 29. Clouds had begun to move into the sky, slowly blocking out the sun. Just as well, for Charon disliked the sunlight. He disliked a lot of things truthfully, and if it was up to him, he would never leave Pluto. But the matter with Athena required a more diplomatic approach which was ill-suited for the Capos. He stood on top of an 8-story building in the industrial area of Athens. He had just finished watching Athena slay the Drakon along with the brothers, Sleep and Death. That Athena's quite the gal, Hypnos commented. Do you think you can take her on, brother? Thanatos did not reply. But Charon had to agree. Athena's strength was quite remarkable. The Olympian gods were in a league of their own. He wondered if the death god would be match for one of them. In any case, this makes our task more troublesome. I was hoping the war would last longer, Charon observed. You were hoping for hundreds more people to die. How kind of you, Hypnos said sarcastically. Charon was not pleased with the condescension in his tone. Hypnos was like that. Unlike his brother, he was always more kind-hearted, but this often made him miss the big picture. Yes, because the longer the war lasted, the more beneficial it would have been to us, Charon explained. If the war had been extended, it would have greatly strained Athena's strength and resources. Then maybe she would have been more open to a helping hand from us. The plan finally dawned on Hypnos. But now that she handled it herself, our dreams of an alliance are dead in the water, Charon completed. The plan was to return to her and offer her assistance once the tide of the war had shifted against her. But as you said, she turned out to be an incredibly capable woman. So then what now? Hypnos asked. Now I head back to make my reports to the Don, replied the ferryman. Great. I could use some rest back home, Hypnos said excitedly. I'm afraid that will have to wait. Only I am returning to Pluto, Charon said, straightening his anchor-printed tie. And what are we to do? Asked Hypnos. Just stay here and observe. Ares might be stubborn enough to keep the war going for a couple more days. The two of you explore the city and try to find any useful information we can use as leverage for our next meeting with Athena, Charon instructed. Also, someone needs to bring back my yacht. That's why you're leaving us here, so we can drive back your stupid boat, grumbled Hypnos. First of all, Hypnos, it's a yacht, not a boat, Charon said. And no, I'm leaving you here because we are no closer to an alliance with this nation than when we came. Now, I have to report back as quickly as I can, so I will be using my portals, but the two of you can still continue the mission here. Hypnos sulked, but Thanatos spoke. Understood. Charon nodded, and a large purple circle appeared behind him. Despite Charon's lack of battle prowess, he did possess an extremely useful technique. Portals. Charon could use his portals to transport himself between any place he had left his mark. Sadly, the Aegis prevented him from directly returning to Pluto, but it would get him close enough to the city entrance from where he could sneak out, and once outside return to the Don immediately. As he stepped through the purple portal, he addressed the two capos. I wish you smooth sailing ahead. Then the portal closed behind him, and the ferryman had disappeared. Smooth sailing ahead. Where does he get all these ferryman lines from? Do you think he has a book where he writes them all down? Hypnos gestured to his brother, but Thanatos did not answer. You're going to be silent and brood the entire time, aren't you? Hypnos continued. The death god did not reply to that either. Great, and here I thought Charon was a dull travel buddy, Hypnos commented. Ares stood in the Aethon, in the balcony of its throne room, his eyes scanning the battlefield. It was only 3 past noon, but thick clouds had darkened the skies above him, which reflected his mood perfectly. His dragon lay dead across the lands, with his men cowering behind its enormous corpse. They would have fled back to camp, but they knew better. They knew cowardice was seen as treason in Mars, and returning before signaling retreat was a crime punishable by execution. But none of them were pressing the attack either. They believed that the war was over and that they had lost. But Ares was too stubborn to signal retreat. Deimos had come to ask him permission to return the men, and had left the room swiftly on seeing the boiling rage he was in. It was inevitable, though. Standing there on the balcony, he could see no other way. He had considered entering the battlefield himself, but he knew that he could not get past the Aegis. His techniques were those that focused on self-armament and endurance, not strength. Though as a god, he did possess enough strength to hurl a cyclops across a field, it was not enough to break the Aegis. The same held true for his large collection of weapons. They were built for combat, best against flesh and bones, not mystical barriers. The Drakon had been resurrected from extinction just for that, but now it lay impaled by towers before his eyes. "Why so glum, piggy? Perhaps a song to cheer you up?" jeered a familiar, unwelcome voice. Apollo slowly descended from the sky and landed beside the war god, his skin glowing lightly even in this clouded sky. He leaned against the railing and said with a smirk, "You have failed spectacularly, it seems." Ares tightened his grip on the railing, crushing it like paper. Through gritted teeth, he spat out, "This is not the time to mock me, Apollo. My tolerance has met its limits, and you are the last person I wish to see right now." "Wrong again, war god," Apollo retorted, but he longer focused on Ares. He was gazing beyond Ares, inside the throne room. Then he said, "He is." The moment the sun god uttered those words, Ares felt the presence. It was so sudden and unexpected, but now it was impossible to ignore. He could feel eyes digging into the back of his neck, and a primal fear washed over him. Ares slowly turned to face his own throne room, but he had no doubt who was waiting for him inside. There he sat on the war god's throne, with nothing but a white toga covering the lower half of his body, held in place by a thick belt made of solid gold. His torso was bare, with only a long white shawl wrapped around his right arm, snaking its way over his shoulder to his back and its other end hanging freely from the left arm, next to a thick golden bangle made from 3 fused rings. His clothes almost seemed to float into place according to his movements. That was all. He wore no gloves or armor or even shoes. This did reveal his godly physique, which was the picture of perfection with wide shoulders and arms that would shame even Ares. His skin glowed as well, but unlike Apollo's, which was a faint shimmer, this appeared as celestial radiance, as though heaven itself resided within him. His hair was white, not the gray or silver that came with age, but a white as pure as fresh snow, thick and swept back and running across his face in the form of a prestigious beard. He sat there waiting with his legs crossed and his eyes closed. Apollo and Ares entered the room and stood before the man on the throne. Then Apollo kneeled to the floor respectfully, and Ares, who was still shaken by the sight of the man, decided that it would be wise for him to do the same and knelt beside the sun god. Up close the man looked heavenly. His face was not one would forget or want to see disappointed. He slowly opened his eyes, his pure white eyes with no pupils. But the same divine radiance shone from these white eyes as well. The man slowly placed both his bare feet on the floor and rose from the throne and moved towards the 2 kneeling gods. "Rise, my sons," commanded Zeus. Their benefactor had finally come in person, and this was not a good sign. The 2 gods got back to their feet while Zeus passed between them to see the war zone himself. Ares waited nervously. He had failed his master in the capture of Daedalus. He had even been permitted to launch a full-scale attack on Athens, but that had not gone well either. "Tell me, Ares, do I not treat all the Olympians as my own children?" Zeus asked, still looking down at the battlegrounds. "Yes, my king, and we are unworthy of such love," Ares said. "Then why do you insult me?" came the next question. "My king, I would never," Ares began. "And yet you Dido," Zeus said, turning to face the war god. "You insult me by being so weak, by your constant failure, and Athena as well by not handing over the inventor when asked. Now even my previous champion has insulted me by killing the inventor and hiding behind my brother's tail." Ares did not answer. The god king spoke in a calm voice like a concerned father, but Ares had been alive too long to be fooled by this. The Skyfather was not happy. "Athena, my poor misguided daughter," Zeus said. "Things have been strained between us since her mentor's death, but she was always a clever girl. I should have known that she would figure out that I was involved in the death of Themis." Ares would have laughed if he wasn't frozen with fear. "Was involved," Zeus said, like he merely looked the other way, while in truth Zeus had killed the Titan Themis with his own hands. But Ares wasn't stupid enough to point this out now. "But her mistake I can understand," Zeus said, moving closer to Ares. "But what about you, my son? I gave you the title of Olympian god, and you repay me with such weakness." "Master, I promise you, I will never fail you again," pleaded the ruler of Mars. Zeus placed a hand on Ares' shoulder. 2 of his fingers lightly stroked the war god's trembling face. Then with an understanding smile, Zeus said, "I know, my son." Thunder boomed outside in the sky, and it was the only thing that masked the war god's scream. Ares was back on his knees, quivering in pain. His hands clutched the side of his face. His left ear lay on the floor beside him. Ares bit down hard to stop himself from screaming. "Why, Ares, I already told you to stand," Zeus said. Ares stood again. His whole body was shaking. Blood leaked profusely from where his ear used to be. "Apollo, help the poor boy. You know how I dislike the sight of blood," Zeus said as he turned and stepped out into the balcony. Apollo, along with being a remarkable marksman, was also the god of healing. He was one of the few people who could heal a wound inflicted by Zeus. He put his healing hands up against Ares' wound, and the bleeding stopped instantly, but the mark and pain still remained. Out on the balcony, Zeus asked, "Is that the Aegis wall that has been troubling you so?" Ares, still too shaken to speak, merely nodded. "I could bring it down with the snap of my fingers," Zeus said, "but I am afraid such a task is beneath me." "Worry not, my lord. I will find a way myself," Ares said, regaining his voice. "No, despite your shortcomings, I feel that Athena must be disciplined for her actions regarding the inventor," Zeus said. "Therefore, I shall lend you some assistance." The god king then turned to the large teak double doors leading into the throne room and shouted, "Come forth, my champion!" At his command, the doors swung open, and there stood a man. The man walked in, towering over 7 feet with his bright golden eyes fixed on his master for his orders. "Champion, it seems that Ares has a predicament. I wish for you to help him with it," said Zeus, and his champion nodded. The god king then turned to Ares and said, "One last thing before I depart. Athena, I want her brought to me alive. Do not fail me again, my son, or you will misplace more than an ear." Then with blinding flash of lightning, Zeus had disappeared. Ares and Apollo now stood staring at the silent champion. Their instructions were clear, and failure was not an option. The champion stepped forward wearing boots made from the hide of the barbarian king's flesh-eating horses, which he killed. He also wore a thick, jewel-encrusted belt that once belonged to the undefeatable queen of the Amazons who he defeated. And on his back he wore a cape weaved from the feathers of the Stymphalian birds Ares was so proud of, feathers he collected as he personally clipped their wings. His hands were covered in gloves made from the black leather of the untamable Cretan bull, which he tamed. On his shoulder was a horned shoulder guard made from the skull of the unbeatable Erymanthian boar, which he slaughtered. And his armor, with the lion-faced chestplate, was forged from the impenetrable golden fur of the Nemean lion which he slay. And on his head, covering his silky brown hair, and hiding half of his long stubble and square jaws, was a helmet forged from the scales of the monstrous Lernaean Hydra, another fearsome beast to which he was executioner. This was a man whom men called God, and gods called monster. This was the champion of the world's mightiest kingdom, Jupiter, the champion of the city of the gods, Olympus, the champion of the god king Zeus. "The Aegis wall, are you certain you can handle it?" Ares asked the champion. "You forget who you speak to. Even the gods know to respect his strength," Apollo said. The champion did not seem the least concerned by these words. Instead, he looked out into balcony to get a good view of Athens. "The Aegis wall is not our only concern," Ares said. "Once inside, Athena remains, not to mention Odysseus, Theseus, and—" "It does not matter," the champion said in a deep grunted voice, cutting off the war god. "Excuse me?" Apollo said. The champion spoke again. "The names of the ones I hunt do not matter. In the end, they are all the same. Born to be crushed by my hands. Born to be crushed by Hercules." The Legions of Athena, Chapter 30. Maximus had returned to the war room, and in his absence, the place had transformed into a small party. Food and drinks were being passed all around, and the monitors were replaying Athena's battle with the Drakon. A few were still surveying the remaining Martian troops that still had not retreated to their base camp, but no one seemed too worried about that. All the Athenians were in a joyous mood, singing victory songs and shouting jokes about Ares and Martians. Even Odysseus had downed a drink or two. Achilles was talking with Icarus, while Theseus brooded nearby. One would have expected that the champion would at least crack a smile considering the victory, but no such luck. The goddess was there as well, though she still looked too tired to be awake. She dutifully sat on her throne, politely smiling at the festivities around her. Maximus found his 3 friends huddled in a corner. They had some food in their hands, but other than that, they were trying to stay invisible. Needless to say, Rex was not happy about all the insults being thrown at Mars. "If I hear one more joke about how many Martians it takes to change a light bulb, I'm gonna stuff someone's head up a socket myself," Rex said through gritted teeth. But he lowered his voice. He wasn't stupid enough to antagonize the soldiers at a time like this. "Well, you better start getting used to the jabs if we are going to live here," Max said, which earned him questioning looks. So he told them about what Achilles mentioned. "It's not a bad plan," Mia mused. "I mean, my work with the hams is done, but I could still join there as an apprentice maybe. It's easy for you to say you're not from Mars." "Max, you can't be seriously considering this," Rex argued. "What other choice do we have?" pointed out Hedger. "Not you too," Rex said angrily. "These people are never going to accept us as one of their own. It's like Hedge said, what real choice do we have? It's not like we can just waltz back into Mars," Max reasoned. "No, but we have other options. We could maybe head back to Vulcan or some other country not at war with Mars. Or maybe we could. But Rex's argument was cut short by a ringing sound. An alarm had just sounded inside the room. Everyone stopped what they were doing on hearing the alarm, and the room went quiet. Even Athena seemed alert again. "What's going on?" Odysseus asked one of the technicians. "Sir, it's one of the outer sensors. Something is approaching the city at an alarming speed from directly above us," he replied. The monitors were all fixed on the disturbance now, and as described, something was hurtling straight towards the Aegis wall. "Ares has begun his counterattack already," one of the soldiers shouted. "Does he have another monster in his arsenal?" hollered another. It was Lady Pallas who replied, "No, it's too small to be any monster. I might be mistaken, but it looks like a man." Athena rose from her seat to examine the monitor herself, but on inspecting the screen, her sharp eyes widened with dread as she whispered, "That is no man." Heracles, that was the name given to him at birth. It meant the blessing of Hera in the ancient Greek tongue, his mother's pathetic attempt to quench the goddess's rage. But Hera would not be so easily pacified, for in her eyes his very existence was a veiled insult to her, one she constantly tried to correct. For you see, his mother had done the greatest sin imaginable to the goddess. She had given birth to her husband's son, to the son of Zeus. It was the Skyfather's epic moment of weakness, when he lusted after the mortal woman Alcmene. But his actions had not gone impervious. The woman bore fruit, and 9 months later Heracles was born. If anything proved that the universe had sense of irony, this was it. For all gods were forbidden from bearing an offspring by the god king so as to not disrupt the balance of power. Though children fathered by gods did spring forth from time to time, for Zeus himself to disobey this command was a different matter. The lineage of Heracles was a closely guarded secret, but Zeus's wife Hera had found out. Alcmene had begged to the goddess that the fault was not her own, that the Skyfather had taken her and she was powerless. Hera, being the goddess of marriage and fertility, had pretended to forgive. But she had not. The very existence of the child offended her to the core. He had to be killed. Her first attempt to do so was to send 2 poisonous snakes into Heracles' cradle when he was 8 months old. But Heracles, mistaking them for toys, began to play with them and accidentally killed them in the process. Hera's attempts at his life did not end there, though none succeeded. Instead, he lost his mother and brother in the crossfire. The might and strength of Heracles grew, and his legendary exploits were immortalized in history as the 12 Labors. His feats were so celebrated, it drew the attention of the god king himself. Zeus appointed him as the champion of Olympus and his country of Jupiter. But he did not do this out of any sort of paternal affection. He did it purely because he found a great deal of use for the immense strength of Heracles, a fact he made clear by ever referring to him only as champion, while he considered the Olympian gods who were no true children of his as his sons and daughters. But Heracles did not care. He had decided that he would be a dutiful son, even if Zeus would not be a dutiful father. Even after becoming the champion of Olympus, one thing did not change: his wrath against the god queen Hera. He could never forgive her for all the pain she had caused him throughout his life, and for causing the death of his family. He found his own name, which praised the goddess to be revolting. That is how he decided he would be Heracles no longer. He reminded himself of this as he leapt off the Stymphalian bird he had borrowed from Ares, and dove straight for Athens. He would collide with the Aegis wall soon, but he was not worried. He raised his hand and summoned his weapon. There it appeared, a great club over 7 feet long, made from olive wood, strengthened by tempered steel and infused with the blood of 1,000 monsters. A club so large that no mortal man could wield it, and so strong no beast had survived it. The club that had been used to fell many foes, including perhaps the fiercest monster of them all, the Nemean lion, earning the weapon its name, the Lion Tamer. As he edged closer to the barrier, he reminded himself who he was. He was the champion of Jupiter, the protector of Olympus, and the dutiful son to an indifferent father. Most importantly, he reminded himself that he was Heracles no longer. As he swung the Lion Tamer down at the Aegis, he shouted, "I am Hercules." With that one strike, the Aegis wall had shattered. This has been a chapter from Book 2 of the new World Odyssey Series, The Legions of Athena. Links to the books in the bio. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this chapter, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next chapter.